The scent of crushed pandan leaves and damp earth rises from the valley floor long before you reach the summit. A heavy, sweet perfume that seems to hold the moisture of the West Javanese clouds. Deep in the Cianjur Regency, the air carries a specific weight, a stillness that suggests the atmosphere itself is tired from centuries of watching the world turn. Here, the landscape is a vibrant emerald tapestry of rice paddies and ancient forests, where the shadows of the volcanic peaks stretch like long dark fingers across the horizon as the light begins to soften. This is the home of Gunung Padang, a name that translates softly to the mountain of enlightenment, or perhaps more literally, the mountain of light. It rises from the earth not as a jagged peak, but as a series of deliberate moss-covered rises, draped in a silence so profound that the rustle of the wind through the nearby tea plantations sounds like a hushed conversation between the living and the dead. Upon first glance, the site appears to be a chaotic tumble of grey stones, thousands of columnar basalt blocks, shaped by nature into hexagonal pillars, strewn across 5 main terraces. But as you stand at the base and look upward, the chaos begins to reveal a rhythm. These stones were not merely scattered, they were placed. They were hauled up these steep slopes by hands that have been dust for millennia, arranged into a monumental staircase that climbs toward the stars. There is a strange magnetic pull to the geometry of the place, a sense that the mountain is not just a geological formation, but a sleeping giant clad in stone armor. As the day fades into a bruised purple twilight, the crickets begin their rhythmic pulse, and the modern world feels very far away. You are standing on the largest megalithic site in all of southeastern Asia, a place where the local villagers have long come to meditate, believing the very soil is saturated with the wisdom of ancestors who existed before recorded time. The terraces rise in tiers, each one a platform of mystery, holding secrets that mainstream history is only just beginning to whisper about. It is here, in this quiet corner of Indonesia, that the timeline of human civilization is being quietly challenged. For decades, it was assumed that these ruins were perhaps 2,500 years old, the work of a sophisticated but relatively recent culture. But as the drills went deeper and the ground-penetrating radar began to peer through the layers of earth, the numbers started to shift. The dates began to recede. 5,000 years, 10,000 years, and then, deep within the core of the mountain, hints of an age that predates the end of the last ice age. I hope that as you listen tonight, you are finding a sense of peace and comfort in these stories of the distant past. If you are settling in for the night and find that these journeys through time help you drift away, you are in the right place. Here at the Slumber Archives, we share new history narrations every single day, each one designed to accompany you into sleep. If you enjoy our time together, please consider subscribing so you never miss a new story, and perhaps leave a like to help others find their way to our quiet corner of the internet. Now, let us return to the Whispering Slopes and the questions that remain carved into the very stone of Gunung Padang. The local folklore of the Sundanese people tells of a king named Siliwangi who attempted to build a palace in a single night, a story that echoes the myths of many ancient structures around the world, from the pyramids to the Great Wall. To the people of the valley, this is a sacred space, a place of power where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual is thin. They do not need carbon dating to tell them that the mountain is ancient. They feel it in the way the air cools as you ascend the stone steps. They see it in the way the moss clings to the basalt, a living skin over an immortal skeleton. But the modern scientific gaze brings a different kind of curiosity, a need to measure, to categorize, and to prove. When researchers first began to look at the stratigraphy, the study of the different layers of soil and rock that build up over time, they found something that shouldn't be there. Beneath the surface layers of the terraces lies a second layer of stones, and beneath that a third, and possibly a fourth. This suggests that Gunung Padang is not just a temple built on a hill, but a hill that was modified, shaped and reinforced over thousands of years, a multi-generational project of such vast scale that it defies our current understanding of hunter-gatherer societies. We are taught that 10,000 years ago, humanity was just beginning to understand the secrets of agriculture, that we were small bands of wanderers, not architects of mountain-sized monuments. And yet, the deeper we look into the heart of the mountain of light, the more we find evidence of a sophisticated intent. There are chambers buried deep within the structure, voids that show up on radar, but have yet to be felt by human hands. What could be resting in that absolute darkness? Is it a tomb, a treasury, or something more profound? A record of a time when the world looked very different than it does today? The concept of deep time is difficult for the human mind to grasp. We measure our lives in decades, our histories in centuries. But Gunung Padang asks us to look much further back, into the era of the Younger Dryas, a period of cataclysmic climate shifts that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. This was a time of rising seas and vanishing lands, a time when the vast continent of Sundaland, which once connected Indonesia to mainland Asia, was swallowed by the ocean. As the waters rose, did a forgotten civilization retreat to these high volcanic ridges? Did they build these terraces as a desperate testament to their existence, a stone message sent forward through the millennia? There is a haunting contrast between the clinical language of archaeology and the lived experience of the site. A scientist might speak of radiocarbon dating, the process of measuring the decay of carbon atoms to determine the age of organic material found near the stones. They might speak of the cultural layer versus the natural layer. But as you walk the terraces in the fading light, those distinctions feel fragile. The stones themselves seem to breathe. The way they are stacked, sometimes with a mortar-like substance that contains traces of iron and silica, suggests a level of engineering that we are told didn't exist in the deep past. Many in the mainstream scientific community remain skeptical, and rightly so, for extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. They argue that the pillars are natural volcanic formations, and that their arrangement might be the result of later peoples simply moving what was already there. It is a patient debate, one that moves with the slow grace of a glacier. But the mountain does not seem to mind the argument. It has seen empires rise and fall in the valley below. It has seen the forests grow over its stones and be cleared away again. It has waited in the rain and the sun for more than 10,000 years, and it can wait a little longer for us to find the truth. As you lie there, imagine the mountain as it was when it was new, before the moss, before the tea plantations, before the world forgot how to build such things. Imagine the sound of thousands of stone hammers ringing out in the humid air, a rhythmic song of creation that echoed across the Sunda shelf. The people who built this were not so different from us. They watched the same stars. They felt the same cool breeze at dusk. They wondered, as we do, what would remain of their lives when they were gone. The mystery of Gunung Padang is not just about its age, or its purpose, or the techniques used to shape its slopes. It is a mystery of memory. It is a reminder that our knowledge of the human story is like a small candle in a very large, very dark room. We can see what is immediately in front of us, but the corners remain in shadow. And in those shadows, ancient mountains wait for us to remember who we were before the ice melted, before the floods came, before the silence of the stones began. The wind picks up slightly now, rustling the leaves of the trees that fringe the site. The shadows have deepened into a true night, and the stars are beginning to appear. The same stars that have guided travelers to this mountain for more time than we can comfortably imagine. For now, let the questions rest. Let the mystery of the whispering slopes be enough. The mountain is sleeping, and perhaps it is time for us to do the same. We will continue our journey into the heart of the mountain soon, but for now, just breathe with the earth and listen to the silence of the mountain of light. The smell of damp earth and ancient volcanic stone often carries a memory of its own, a silent record of every rainstorm that has washed over these slopes for 10,000 years. In the early 20th century, this scent greeted the Dutch colonial researchers as they began to hack through the thick emerald curtain of the Indonesian jungle, unaware that they were stepping onto the threshold of a chronological impossibility. It was the year 1914 when a man named Nicolaas Johannes Krom first brought the site into the official ledger of Western history. As an archaeologist and historian, Krom was accustomed to the grand temples of Borobudur and Prambanan, structures whose origins were well documented and understood within the framework of known civilizations. But Gunung Padang was different. It did not speak the language of the kings Krom knew. He described it in his reports with a sense of clinical curiosity, noting the presence of thousands of rectangular stones, pillars of basaltic andesite scattered across the summit like the rib cage of a fallen giant. At the time, the Dutch colonial administration was fascinated by the sheer scale of the stone pillars, yet they viewed them through a lens of profound limitation. They saw the 5 terraces rising like a grand staircase toward the clouds, and they saw a mystery that they assumed was relatively shallow in its depth. The initial reports characterized the site as a megalithic cemetery, or perhaps a place of minor local worship, a relic of a primitive culture that had lived and died within the comfort of the recent past. There was a quiet dismissiveness in their tone, a belief that anything found in the far-off colonies must surely be a simple footnote compared to the grand cathedrals of Europe or the pyramids of Giza. They looked at the 5 distinct levels and noted how they were oriented with a peculiar precision, but they lacked the tools and perhaps the imagination to ask why. As you walk through the mind's eye up those 5 terraces today, you can feel the intentionality of the layout. Each level is wider than the last, built with thousands of these naturally formed volcanic columns that have been hauled, shaped, and stacked by hands we no longer have names for. The Dutch noticed that the entire complex seemed to point toward the horizon, aligning itself with the surrounding volcanic peaks in a way that suggests the mountain itself was being used as a lens to view the heavens. And yet, the early theories insisted this was merely a natural formation, a quirk of geology where the lava had cooled into these hexagonal shapes and been slightly adjusted by local tribes. They called it a natural hill with a crown of stones, a phrase that allowed them to file the report away and turn their attention back to more relevant history. But nature does not often build staircases that align with the stars. Nature does not typically stack 20-ton columns in precise geometric patterns that span across multiple tiers. The silence of the site in those early years was not a reflection of its insignificance, but rather a reflection of a world not yet ready to listen. Following Krom's documentation in 1914, a strange quiet fell over Gunung Padang. For decades, the mountain of light was left to the wind and the encroaching vines. It became a playground for local children and a place of quiet prayer for those who still felt the hum of the earth beneath their feet, while the academic world moved on, convinced that the story of the mountain had already been told. During those long years of silence, the jungle did what it does best. It reclaimed the narrative. Moss softened the sharp edges of the basalt, and the deep roots of trees wound themselves between the stones, acting like slow-motion anchors that held the secrets of the mountain in place. To the casual observer, it was just another hill in West Java, a beautiful but unremarkable part of the landscape. They did not know that beneath the topsoil, beneath the roots and the fallen leaves, lay layers of construction that would eventually challenge everything we think we know about the dawn of human intelligence. The Dutch had seen only the skin of the mountain. They had no way of knowing that the heart of the structure was beating with a much older rhythm. Early 20th century science was built on the idea of linear progress, the belief that humans moved steadily from simple tools to complex cities in a straight, unbroken line. To suggest that a massive, sophisticated megalithic site could exist in Indonesia, dating back to a time when most of the world was thought to be occupied by simple hunter-gatherers, was more than just a radical idea. It was an impossibility. And so, the reports gathered dust in archives in the Netherlands and Jakarta. The theories of a simple cemetery became the accepted truth, a convenient way to ignore the nagging questions posed by the site's sheer scale. As the decades drifted by, the mountain waited. It survived the turmoil of world wars and the changing of empires, remaining a silent sentinel over the lush valleys of the Cianjur Regency. It is fascinating to reflect on how much of our history is lost simply because we aren't looking for it, or because we have decided in advance what we are allowed to find. The stones of Gunung Padang were right there, resting in the open air, visible to anyone who cared to climb the steep slopes. Yet, because they did not fit the established timeline of human development, they were treated as geological curiosities rather than the blueprints of a lost era. The alignment of the terraces is perhaps the most haunting detail of those early records. Even without modern satellite mapping, the Dutch noted that the site was oriented toward the volcano Mount Gede. In many ancient cultures, mountains were seen as the bridge between the earthly and the divine, the axis mundi, where the world of men met the world of the gods. By building Gunung Padang to face its larger volcanic neighbor, the architects were creating a dialogue between the earth and the sky. This was not the work of a people struggling to survive. It was the work of a people who had the luxury of time, the mastery of engineering, and a profound philosophical connection to the landscape. We often think of the past as a dark room that we are slowly illuminating with a small flashlight. In 1914, Nicholas Crom and his contemporaries stepped into that room and shone their light on one small corner, seeing a few stacked stones and a beautiful view. They assumed the rest of the room was empty. They couldn't see the vast shadows stretching behind them, the layers of stratigraphy, the study of rock layers, that would one day reveal a history stretching back through the Younger Dryas, a period of cataclysmic climate change nearly 12,000 years ago. To them, the deep time of human civilization was a few thousand years at most. They were standing on the roof of a buried world, thinking they were merely standing on a hill. The mystery of Gunung Padang is not just in what was found, but in the profound silence that followed its discovery. It is a reminder that knowledge is often a matter of timing. Had the site been fully excavated in the 1920s, the data might have been misinterpreted or lost to the limitations of the era's technology. Instead, the mountain was allowed to sleep for another 70 years, cradling its secrets while the world outside evolved, waiting for a generation that would possess the ground-penetrating radar and the carbon dating techniques necessary to peel back the layers of the earth. As you listen to the rustle of the leaves in your mind, imagine those early explorers walking away from the site, closing their notebooks and descending the mountain. They left behind a site that was already ancient when the pyramids were but a dream. They left behind stones that had been cooled by the same rains that fell on the last of the mammoths. And as they left, the mountain settled back into its green slumber, the basalt pillars glowing faintly in the moonlight, waiting for the day when the world would finally be ready to ask the right questions and to listen to the answers that the earth had been whispering all along. The journey into the deep layers of the mountain is only just beginning, and the further we go, the more the ground beneath us seems to shift, revealing a past that is far more complex and far more beautiful than we ever dared to imagine. Imagine the sound of a low, rhythmic pulse, a vibration so subtle it is felt in the marrow of the bone rather than heard with the ear. This is the language of the earth itself, a silent dialogue between the stone and the modern instruments we use to peer into the darkness. To understand Gunung Padang, we must look past the moss-covered pillars that rest upon the summit and turn our gaze downward into the very heart of the extinct volcanic neck upon which this mountain of light is perched. For decades, we relied on our eyes to tell us the story of this place, but the human eye is easily deceived by the passage of eons. It sees only the skin of the world, the weathered surface that has been battered by tropical rains and reclaimed by the creeping vines of the jungle. In the early 2000s, a team of geologists and archaeologists decided to listen to the mountain in a different way. They brought with them ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography, tools that send waves of energy deep into the soil, recording how they bounce and bend as they encounter different materials. It is a process not unlike an ultrasound, a way of seeing the unseen without disturbing the quiet of the grave. As these pulses travelled through the basalt and the clay, they did not return with the messy, chaotic signature of natural, solid rock. Instead, they revealed something that defied every expectation of the traditional historical narrative. Deep beneath the surface, layered like the rings of an ancient tree, lay a series of massive geometric anomalies that seemed to stretch down more than 30 meters into the earth. The data suggested that the visible ruins on the top of the hill are merely the capstone of a much larger, much older pyramid-like structure. While the surface site covers several thousand square meters, the seismic scans began to outline a monument that could dwarf even the Great Pyramid of Giza in its sheer volume. But it was not just the size that left the researchers breathless. It was the voids. Within the deep, dark interior of the mountain, the sensors detected large, hollow chambers, vast rectangular spaces buried beneath layers of carefully arranged stone. These are not small cracks or fissures, but significant rooms, some measuring several meters in height and length, sitting in a silence that has likely remained unbroken for thousands upon thousands of years. As the maps of these underground cavities began to take shape, a profound debate emerged among the scientific community, a quiet war of interpretation that continues to this day. On one side, those who favor a natural explanation suggest that these voids might be lava tubes, hollow tunnels formed by ancient volcanic activity, common in certain types of basaltic landscapes. They argue that the mountain is simply a geological curiosity, a natural hill that ancient people merely decorated with stone pillars. But this explanation begins to fray when one looks at the precision of the scans. The voids are not the irregular, twisting shapes typically left by flowing magma. They appear deliberate, aligned with a geometric intentionality that suggests the hand of a builder. They sit at the center of what appears to be a massive, terraced construction, wrapped in layers of stone that show signs of being worked and transported from elsewhere. If these are indeed man-made rooms, we are forced to confront a reality that challenges the very foundations of human history. To create hollow chambers, deep within a mountain, requires an understanding of structural engineering, load-bearing weights, and geological stability that we generally do not attribute to civilizations living 10 or 15,000 years ago. It suggests a culture that did not merely live upon the land, but possessed the will and the means to reshape the very bones of the earth. We find ourselves standing at the edge of a great mystery, peering through the digital eyes of our machinery into a darkness that refuses to give up its secrets easily. The scale of this buried structure is difficult to grasp when standing on the breezy, sunlit terraces of the summit. Up there, the world feels small and manageable, a place of prayer and contemplation. But as the seismic data flows into the monitors, the mountain seems to grow, expanding downward into the deep time of the Pleistocene. The researchers found that the site is composed of at least 4 distinct layers, each representing a different epoch of human endeavor. The surface we see is only the most recent chapter. Beneath it lies a second layer of columnar rocks, then a third layer of arranged stone and soil, and finally the fourth layer, the core of the structure, where the largest chambers lie hidden. This stratigraphy, the study of these different layers, tells a story of a place that was sacred for a duration of time that is almost impossible for the modern mind to fathom. It suggests that for millennia, generation after generation returned to this specific mountain, building upon the work of their ancestors, perhaps even forgetting who the original builders were, yet still feeling the pull of the site's inherent power. The sheer mass of the material moved to create these layers is calculated in the hundreds of thousands of tons. This was not the work of a small nomadic tribe. This was the work of a society with a complex social structure, a unified vision, and a relationship with the landscape that was both intimate and monumental. As we contemplate these buried voids, we must wonder what they were intended for. Were they tombs for kings whose names had been erased from memory? Were they storehouses for knowledge or grain, or perhaps ritual spaces designed to amplify the resonance of the earth? Some have even whispered of acoustic chambers, places where the very shape of the room was designed to interact with sound in ways we are only beginning to understand. In the quiet of the laboratory, looking at the grey and white printouts of the radar scans, the lines between geology and archaeology begin to blur. The mountain becomes a ghost, a shimmering outline of what used to be, a monument that has been swallowed by the earth itself. The mystery of the voids at Gunung Padang remains one of the most provocative questions in modern archaeology because it cannot be answered by looking at the surface. It requires us to go deeper, to penetrate the layers of sediment and the even thicker layers of our own preconceptions about the past. Every time a new scan is performed, the image becomes a little clearer, yet the questions only grow more complex. We are looking at a structure that was already ancient when the first stones of Stonehenge were being placed, a site that was perhaps already a ruin when the pyramids of Egypt were being dreamed of. And so, we wait. We wait for the technology to improve, for the permissions to be granted, and for the mountain to decide when it is ready to reveal what lies within those hollow hearts. Until then, the chambers remain as they have been for 10,000 years, silent, dark, and heavy with the weight of a history we are not yet wise enough to read. The mountain does not hurry. It has seen the rise and fall of countless suns, and it knows that eventually the truth will rise to the surface, just as the basalt pillars once rose from the cooling fire of the earth. As the sensors are packed away and the researchers leave the site for the night, the mountain settles back into its long green sleep, the secrets of its deep chambers protected by the very soil that gave them life, leaving us to dream of what might be found when the first door is finally opened. The smell of damp earth and crushed fern lingers in the humid air of West Java, a scent that has likely remained unchanged for thousands of years, even as the world beyond the mountain transformed beyond all recognition. It is in this stillness that the modern world first began to pull at the threads of a mystery that threatens to unravel our entire understanding of the human story. When the drill bits first bit into the soil of Gunung Padang, they were seeking more than just stone. They were seeking the ghost of a timeline, a way to pin this massive structure to a specific moment in our collective memory. What they brought back from the darkness below was not merely dirt and rock, but organic fragments, bits of ancient carbon that had been trapped in the layers of the mound, shielded from the sun and the wind for an eternity. As the researchers began the process of radiocarbon dating, a method of measuring the decay of carbon atoms to determine the age of organic matter, they expected to find dates that aligned with the known history of the region. They expected to find evidence of the megalithic culture from perhaps 2,500 years ago, a time when humanity was already well versed in the shaping of stone. But as the results returned from the laboratories, a profound silence fell over the team. The samples taken from the uppermost layers confirmed what was already known, but as the drills went deeper, descending through the second, third, and fourth layers of the structure, the dates began to retreat further and further back into the misty depths of prehistory. The numbers were staggering: 16,000 years, 20,000 years. And finally, from the deepest reaches of the site, a date that whispered of 25,000 years before the present day. To sit with that number is to feel a strange sort of vertigo, a shifting of the ground beneath one's feet. 25,000 years ago, the world was a vastly different place. It was the height of the last ice age, a time when vast glaciers gripped the northern hemispheres and the sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. According to the established narrative of human progress, our ancestors were nomadic hunter-gatherers during this epoch, living in small mobile groups and possessing neither the social organization nor the engineering knowledge to move thousands of tons of basalt. This is the heart of the chronology conflict, a point where the physical evidence of the earth meets the rigid architecture of our historical beliefs. The Neolithic Revolution, the period when humans supposedly first transitioned from wandering to settling, from foraging to farming, is generally placed around 12,000 years ago. It is the dawn of what we call civilization. If Gunung Padang truly dates back 25,000 years, it predates the oldest known megalithic sites, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, by more than double their age. It suggests that while the rest of the world was supposedly struggling to survive the biting cold of the Pleistocene, someone here, on this lush volcanic island, was already stacking massive pillars of stone with a purpose we can no longer name. The stratigraphy of the site, the study of these layered deposits, tells a story of successive waves of human effort, or perhaps a single, incredibly long-lived culture that returned to this mountain again and again across the millennia. Each layer is like a page in a book that has been buried in the mud, the ink faded, but the impressions still visible to those who know how to look. The deeper the researchers went, the more the complexity of the site seemed to increase, challenging the idea that human capability always moves in a straight line from simple to complex. Instead, Gunung Padang hints at a cycle of rising and falling, a pulse of creation that may have been interrupted by the cataclysms that ended the last ice age. Naturally, these findings have not been met with universal acceptance. The global archaeological community looks upon these dates with a profound and perhaps necessary skepticism. To accept a date of 25,000 years is to accept that our entire timeline of human development is missing a massive foundational piece. Critics argue that the organic material found deep within the mound, the bits of charcoal and ancient soil, might not actually be linked to the construction of the site. They suggest that perhaps natural processes, the movement of groundwater or the shifting of the volcanic earth, could have carried older carbon into younger layers, creating a false impression of extreme antiquity. There is also the matter of the pyramid classification itself. Many mainstream geologists maintain that Gunung Padang is not a man-made pyramid at all, but rather the neck of an ancient volcano, weathered by time and tectonic forces into a shape that only mimics human design. They see the basalt pillars not as quarried blocks, but as natural formations known as columnar jointing, which occurs when lava cools and cracks into geometric shapes. To these observers, the structure is a masterpiece of nature, not of man, and the carbon dates are simply reflections of the natural history of the mountain's soil, unrelated to any architectural intent. And yet, those who have walked the terraces feel a different truth in the soles of their feet. They point to the way the stones are oriented, the way they have been stacked and filled with a mysterious mortar made of clay and iron. They ask how nature could produce such precise alignments, or why ancient peoples would choose this specific peak to crown with their most sacred efforts if it were not already something special. The conflict is not just about dates and data. It is a conflict of vision. One side sees the triumph of geological forces over millions of years, while the other sees the fingerprints of a lost humanity, reaching out to us across a gulf of time that we are not yet prepared to bridge. As the debate continues in the halls of universities and the pages of scientific journals, the mountain remains indifferent to our labels. It does not care if we call it a pyramid or a hill, nor does it care if we believe it is 10,000 or 20,000 years old. It simply exists, a silent witness to the passage of the younger Dryas, the sudden violent cooling of the earth that occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. If there was a civilization here before that time, it would have faced a world in total upheaval, a world of rising seas and changing climates that might have wiped away their cities and their records, leaving only the heaviest of stones behind. We are left to wonder about the people who might have stood on these terraces during the height of the Ice Age. If the dates are correct, they would have looked out over a landscape that is now submerged beneath the Java Sea. They would have seen a vast continent known as Sundaland, a fertile plain that once connected Indonesia to the mainland of Asia. In their eyes, Gunung Padang might not have been a mountain in the middle of a forest, but a high, sacred lookout over a sprawling world that has since been claimed by the waves. The chronology conflict is, in many ways, a struggle to remember a world we have forgotten how to see. The skepticism of the scientific community is the forge in which the truth must be tempered, but the evidence at Gunung Padang refuses to be easily dismissed. Every core sample that reveals a deeper layer of worked stone, every radar scan that shows a hollow chamber deep within the earth, adds another layer of mystery to the mountain. It asks us to be patient, to listen to the slow heartbeat of the earth, and to accept that there are chapters of our story that were written in a language we have forgotten how to read. The stones are there, heavy and cold under the tropical sun, waiting for the day when our understanding of time is broad enough to encompass them. Meanwhile, the moss continues to grow over the basalt, and the roots of the trees push deeper into the cracks between the layers, intertwining the living world with the remnants of the old. The mountain settles, a few millimeters at a time, into the soft earth, as if trying to hide its secrets even more deeply. We stand on the surface, peering through the keyhole of our limited history, catching only glimpses of a grandeur that defies our current maps of the past. As the light fades and the shadows of the pillars stretch long across the grass, we are reminded that we are but latecomers to this place, guests in a house whose foundations were laid when the world was young and the stars were different than the ones we see tonight. If you were to press your ear against one of the dark, heavy stones at Gunung Padang, you might imagine you could hear the faint, rhythmic pulse of the earth itself, a vibration left over from the fire that forged this mountain. These stones are not ordinary boulders. They are columnar basalts, long hexagonal logs of volcanic rock that formed millions of years ago when molten lava cooled and contracted into geometric perfection. In the eyes of a geologist, they are a natural wonder, the result of thermal tension and the patient cooling of the deep crust. And yet, as we move our hands across their weathered surfaces, we find that nature's geometry has been hijacked by a different kind of will. While these stones were born of the volcano, they did not fall into these patterns by chance. In the natural world, columnar basalt grows vertically, rising from the earth like the pipes of a great cathedral organ, rooted firmly in the bedrock. But here, on this high Indonesian terrace, the logs lie horizontally. They have been severed from their source, carried up the steep slopes of the mountain, and stacked with a deliberate, haunting precision. Thousands upon thousands of these multi-ton pillars have been arranged into walls, embankments, and enclosures, creating a stepped pyramid that rises toward the clouds. The sheer scale of the labor is difficult to hold in the mind. To move even one of these stones would require a dozen men and a complex system of rollers and levers. To move tens of thousands of them across the rugged terrain of the Pleistocene era, a time when mainstream history tells us humans were still wandering in small nomadic bands, is a feat that borders on the impossible. As we walk among the ruins, we begin to notice something even more unsettling than the weight of the stones. Between the basalt pillars, there is a substance that should not exist. In many places, the rocks are held together by a mysterious material, a dark, clay-like slurry that researchers have come to call an ancient mortar. When this substance was analyzed in laboratories, the results sent ripples of unease through the scientific community. It is not merely packed earth or mud. It appears to be a sophisticated mixture of clay, iron, and silica. A primitive form of cement or glue designed to bind the massive stones into a singular, earthquake-resistant mass. Radiocarbon dating, the process of measuring the decay of carbon atoms to determine age, suggests that parts of this binding material are more than 10,000 years old, with some samples reaching back 20,000 years or more. This discovery challenges the very foundation of our understanding of human progress. At 20,000 years ago, the world was gripped by the last glacial maximum, a time of biting cold and shifting ice. Our ancestors, we are told, were focused purely on survival, hunting megafauna and gathering what the harsh landscape provided. They were not supposed to be master masons. They were not supposed to be chemical engineers, mixing mortars to stabilize megalithic structures. And yet, the mortar is there, tucked into the seams of the basalt, holding the weight of the ages. It suggests a level of social organization and technical knowledge that seems to have appeared out of nowhere. Or perhaps it is the remnant of a lineage of knowledge that has been completely erased from our collective memory. The logistics of Gunung Padang present a riddle that science has yet to solve. Imagine the mountain as it was then, a dense, steaming jungle, or perhaps a cooler, drier highland during the gaps in the ice ages. There were no beasts of burden here, no horses or oxen to pull the sleds of stone. Every single hexagonal log had to be hauled by human strength alone. If we consider the staggering volume of rock used to construct the various layers of the site, we are looking at millions of cubic meters of material. To achieve this in the deep past would require a workforce of hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals, all working in concert toward a singular vision. They would need a stable food supply, a hierarchy of leadership, and a shared language of engineering. These are the hallmarks of a high civilization, yet they appear in a time period that is, for all intents and purposes, a blank page in our history books. And then there is the shaping of the stones themselves. While columnar basalt naturally forms into hexagons, many of the pillars at Gunung Padang show signs of being modified. Their ends have been blunted, their faces smoothed, as if the builders were not content with what nature provided, and sought to refine the geometry to suit their aesthetic or functional needs. How did they cut such hard, volcanic rock without metal tools? If they used stone hammers and chisels, the work would have taken generations, a slow, patient carving of the mountain that spanned centuries. This suggests a culture that did not think in years or decades, but in epochs, a people who viewed themselves as part of a long, unbroken chain, building a monument that they knew they would never see finished in their own lifetimes. As the mist rolls in from the valley, softening the edges of the basalt logs, we are forced to confront the limits of our own technological arrogance. We often look back at the people of the Pleistocene as primitive, yet they achieved a harmony with the landscape that we struggle to replicate today. They took the bones of the earth, these volcanic pillars, and wove them into a tapestry of stone that has survived the rise and fall of countless empires. The glue that binds these rocks together is more than just mortar. It is a physical manifestation of a lost science, a secret recipe for longevity that we have forgotten. The mystery of the columnar basalt is not just in how it was moved, but why this specific material was chosen. Basalt is rich in iron and has unique magnetic properties. Some researchers have noted that the site sits atop a natural magnetic anomaly, and that the arrangement of the stones may have been designed to amplify or focus certain energies. While this remains in the realm of speculation, it adds another layer to the enigma. Were the builders merely choosing the most convenient material, or were they aware of the subtle forces within the rock itself? Did they see the mountain not just as a place of worship, but as a machine, a resonant structure built to harmonize with the frequencies of the earth? We are left standing in the silence of the fifth terrace, looking down at the layers of history stacked beneath our feet. The stratigraphy, the study of these layers, tells a story of constant rebuilding. Each successive culture that found this hill recognized its importance, adding their own stones, their own mortar, their own prayers to the mountain. But as we dig deeper, the stones become larger, the mortar more sophisticated, and the mystery more profound. The deeper we go, the further we move away from the light of known history and into the shadows of a time that science cannot yet explain. It is a humbling thought to realize that the very ground we walk upon is a puzzle with pieces missing. We see the hexagonal logs, we see the mortar, and we see the impossible scale of the work. But the hands that moved the stones remain invisible. They are ghosts in the machine of time, leaving behind only these silent, heavy witnesses to their existence. And so, we continue to measure, to date, and to analyze, hoping that one day the stones will speak, and the mortar will reveal the secret of its composition. Until then, Gunung Padang remains a monument to the unknown, a place where the laws of history as we know them seem to dissolve into the mountain air. As we prepare to descend further into the heart of the structure, into the hidden chambers and the anomalies detected by ground-penetrating radar, we must carry with us the weight of these stones. They remind us that the story of humanity is far older and far more complex than we ever dared to imagine. The world was not empty before the dawn of the first cities. It was filled with builders, dreamers, and engineers who looked at a volcanic mountain and saw the potential for a masterpiece. As the shadows of the pillars grow long and the air turns cold, we feel the presence of that ancient ambition still vibrating in the basalt, still waiting to be understood after 20,000 years of silence. To understand the mind of the ancient architect, one must first learn to see the world not as a collection of separate objects, but as a single, breathing clock. The builders of Gunung Padang did not merely pile stone upon stone, they were weaving the earth into the fabric of the cosmos, stitching the basalt skin of the mountain to the very heart of the stars. As we stand upon the uppermost terrace, looking out over the misty valleys of West Java, we begin to notice a deliberate rhythmic geometry that defies the chaotic growth of nature. The central axis of the site, carved and levelled with a precision that seems impossible for a culture supposedly primitive, does not follow the natural slope of the volcanic neck. Instead, it reaches out toward a specific point on the horizon, a silent finger pointing toward the secrets of the sky. The 5 terraces of the pyramid rise like a giant staircase toward the heavens, and it is here, in the alignment of these massive stone pillars, that the mystery deepens into something profound. When the first light of the morning sun crests the distant ridges, it does not strike the mountain at random. During specific times of the year, the light flows through the megalithic gates like a golden river, illuminating the sacred spaces with a mathematical certainty. This is not the work of a people living day to day, concerned only with the immediate needs of survival. This is the work of a civilization that possessed a deep, enduring knowledge of the earth's tilt and the sun's long, wobbling journey through the seasons. They understood the solstices and the equinoxes, the moments when the world pauses in its breath before turning back toward the light or the dark. As the years pass and our instruments for measuring the stars become more refined, we find that the orientation of Gunung Padang mirrors the same celestial obsession found at the Great Pyramid of Giza or the standing stones of Stonehenge. There is a universal language written in stone across the globe, a silent code that speaks of a time when humanity was intimately connected to the movements of the planets. At Gunung Padang, the terraces align with remarkable accuracy toward the rising sun on the horizon, but they also seem to beckon toward the constellations that once ruled the night sky tens of thousands of years ago. To achieve such precision, the builders would have required a sophisticated understanding of spherical trigonometry and long-term astronomical observation, a level of science that mainstream history tells us did not exist until many millennia later. Imagine a priest or an astronomer standing on this very peak in the deep purple of a prehistoric night. Around them, the silence of the jungle is absolute, broken only by the distant call of a predator or the rustle of leaves in the mountain breeze. They are not looking at the ground, but upward, tracking the slow, majestic rotation of the Milky Way. They see the stars not as distant fires, but as markers of time, guides for planting, and perhaps the dwellings of the gods who shaped the world. The stones they placed were meant to capture that celestial order, to bring the harmony of the universe down to the soil of Indonesia. When we measure the angles of the basalt columns, we aren't just looking at rocks. We are looking at a frozen map of the sky as it appeared when the world was still gripped by the fingers of the last ice age. The precision involved in this construction suggests a society with a highly organized social structure and a shared vision that spanned generations. It takes more than a few seasons to observe the stars closely enough to build a mountain in their image. It takes centuries of record-keeping, a tradition of passing down knowledge from teacher to student, from father to son. This site was an ancient observatory, a place where the barrier between the earthly and the divine was intentionally blurred. The builders were masters of the landscape, capable of moving thousands of tons of volcanic rock to ensure that their temple would forever be in sync with the pulse of the cosmos. As we trace the lines of the terraces, we find ourselves wondering how they achieved such accuracy without the tools we consider essential today. There are no iron levels, no glass lenses, no digital sensors. Only the keen eye, the steady hand, and an intellect that saw the hidden patterns in the chaos of the stars. Meanwhile, the comparison to other megalithic wonders becomes unavoidable. Just as the shadows at Stonehenge mark the changing of the seasons, and the shafts of the Great Pyramid point toward Orion and Sirius, Gunung Padang stands as a testament to a global phenomenon of sky-watching. It suggests a shared heritage of wisdom, a lost golden age where the stars were the primary focus of human endeavor. Perhaps these sites were part of a vast, worldwide network of markers, designed to keep track of the great year, the 26,000-year cycle of the Earth's precession. If Gunung Padang truly dates back 20,000 years, it would mean that this knowledge was perfected during the Younger Dryas, a period of catastrophic climate change and rising seas. While the rest of the world was struggling to adapt to a changing environment, the people of this volcanic island were looking upward, seeking stability in the eternal motions of the heavens. The ritualistic significance of these alignments cannot be overstated. For the ancient builders, the rising sun was likely more than just a source of heat. It was a rebirth, a daily miracle that confirmed the survival of the world. By aligning their most sacred structure with the dawn, they were ensuring that their civilization remained in favor with the forces of creation. The terraces were likely stages for elaborate ceremonies, where the timing of every movement was dictated by the position of the stars. As the light hit a specific pillar, a chant might begin, or a sacrifice might be offered. The entire mountain vibrating with the energy of thousands of people gathered in the dark. It is a haunting thought, that beneath the layers of soil and the roots of the trees, there lies a machine for talking to the gods, its gears made of stone and its power sourced from the sun itself. In the quiet moments of the evening, when the mist rolls in from the surrounding peaks and blankets the ruins in a soft white shroud, the mathematical beauty of the sight becomes even more apparent. The geometry is not forced. It feels as though it grew out of the mountain, a natural extension of the Earth's own energy. This is the hallmark of a high civilization, the ability to harmonize human creation with the natural world. We are left to grapple with the implications of this precision. If the people of the ancient Sundaland continent were capable of such feats, what else have we forgotten about them? What other secrets are hidden in the stratigraphy, the layers of earth and time that we have only just begun to peel back? The more we learn about the alignments of Gunung Padang, the more we realize that our ancestors were not the shadows we imagined them to be. They were the architects of light. As we contemplate the vast stretches of deep time, the 20,000 years that separate us from the hands that shaped these stones, we feel a sense of profound humility. Our modern world is built on silicon and steel, technologies that may not last 1,000 years, let alone 20. Yet here, the basalt remains, still holding its position, still waiting for the sun to rise over the exact same notch in the hills. The builders of Gunung Padang achieved a kind of immortality, not through the survival of their names or their stories, but through the permanence of their mathematics. They understood that while empires fall and languages die, the stars never lie. They built their legacy in the only language that is truly universal, the language of the heavens. And so, we continue to look at these ruins, not just as a puzzle to be solved, but as a mirror reflecting a version of ourselves that we have long since forgotten, a version that knew its place among the constellations and wasn't afraid to move mountains to stay there. Deep within the soul of West Java, there is a name that carries more weight than any carbon date or stratigraphic layer, a name that hums through the wind in the bamboo groves and settles in the mist of the highlands. King Siliwangi. To the Sundanese people, he is not merely a figure of the past, but the eternal guardian of their identity, the great king of Pajajaran who ruled with such wisdom and justice that his reign became a golden era, a time when the boundaries between the physical world and the spirit realm were as thin as a veil of morning fog. As we stand upon the basalt columns of Gunung Padang, we are stepping into the heart of his legend. While modern science struggles to reconcile the conflicting ages of the stones, the local oral traditions offer a different kind of truth, one that does not require a laboratory to understand. The elders tell us that this mountain was not built by the slow, agonizing labor of thousands of men over centuries. Instead, they whisper of a single miraculous night, a night when the king, possessed of a power that transcended the mortal coil, commanded the very earth to rise. They say the stones were called forth from the depths, arranging themselves into these massive terraces through supernatural means, finishing just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. It is easy for the modern mind to dismiss such stories as mere fantasy, the colorful embroidery of a culture trying to explain what it has forgotten. But history has a curious way of hiding in plain sight within these myths. Oral traditions often act as a vessel, preserving the emotional and spiritual reality of a place long after the technical details have faded into the dust. When the people speak of a mountain built in a night, perhaps they are not describing a literal 24 hours, but rather the suddenness with which a profound realization or a new way of life took hold. Or perhaps they are remembering a time when humanity possessed a relationship with the natural world that we can no longer conceive of.
a time when the mind and the mountain were not so separate as they are today. In the eyes of those who follow the old ways, Gunung Padang is the ultimate Pundan Berundak, a term that translates to stepped mound or terraced sanctuary. These are not merely architectural styles, they are physical manifestations of a journey. To climb the terraces is to ascend through the levels of consciousness, leaving the heavy, cluttered air of the valley behind and moving toward the purity of the sky. This is why the site has remained a place of deep meditation for as long as memory exists. Even now, in the quiet hours when the tourists have departed and the shadows of the trees stretch long across the volcanic tracks, you can find seekers sitting in the stillness, hoping to catch a fragment of the wisdom that King Siliwangi left behind. There is a specific energy here that defies the cold measurements of a magnetometer. It is a sense of being watched, not by something malevolent, but by the weight of 1,000 years of prayer. The Sundanese believe that the king never truly died, but underwent a process known as ngahyang, a spiritual disappearance, where he and his entire kingdom vanished into the unseen dimensions to avoid a bloody conflict. They believe he is still there, inhabiting the spaces between the stones, waiting for a time when the world is ready to remember the balance he once maintained. Archaeology often looks at the ground, searching for the how and the when, but the legend of Siliwangi asks us to look at the why. Why did this specific peak become the focal point for such immense effort? The science of the site tells us of ancient magnetism and buried chambers, but the folklore tells us of a king who wanted to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. Perhaps the supernatural means described in the stories are simply a forgotten technology, a way of interacting with the resonance of the earth that our modern instruments are too loud to hear. As we move through the terraces, we see the stones not as cold, dead objects, but as participants in a grand, silent ritual. The way they are laid out reflects the ancient concept of the mountain as a cosmic axis, the center of the world around which all of life revolves.
In the Sundanese worldview, the mountain is the father and the water is the mother, and here at Gunung Padang they meet in a perfect, eternal embrace. The king, in his wisdom, recognized that to build here was to harmonize with the heartbeat of the planet itself. The mystery of Gunung Padang is not just a mystery of stone and soil, it is a mystery of the human spirit and its capacity to remember. While the scientists argue over the younger Dryas and the precision of radiocarbon dating, the locals continue to bring offerings of flowers and incense to the spots where they feel the king's presence most strongly. They do not need a peer-reviewed paper to tell them that this place is ancient, or that it was built by a power greater than the sum of its parts. They have the stories passed down from grandmother to grandchild, stories that have survived volcanic eruptions, colonial invasions, and the slow erosion of time. And so, we are left with a choice in how we view these ruins. We can see them as a puzzle of lithic fragments and geological anomalies, or we can see them as the throne of a vanished king who mastered the art of living in tandem with the unseen. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle, in that twilight space where the empirical meets the ephemeral. As the wind whistles through the gaps in the basalt, it sounds almost like a voice, a low, steady hum that reminds us that some things are not meant to be solved, but simply experienced. The mountain keeps its secrets well, tucked away beneath layers of clay and the thick canopy of the jungle. But to the one who listens with their heart as much as their mind, the legend of King Siliwangi provides a map, not to a treasure of gold, but to a treasure of meaning. It suggests that the builders of Gunung Padang were not just engineers, but poets of the landscape, men and women who understood that a pile of stones could become a ladder to the divine if placed with the right intention. In the silence of the upper terraces, away from the noise of the modern world, it becomes easier to believe in the impossible. It becomes easier to imagine a king who could move mountains with a word, and a people who saw the stars as their neighbors. The archaeology may one day give us a date, and the geology may one day give us a map of the chambers below. But it is the legend that gives the site its soul. It is the story of Siliwangi that ensures that even if every stone were to be moved, the essence of Gunung Padang would remain, etched into the very air of the highlands, waiting for the next seeker to climb the stairs and join the meditation. To understand the silence of the stones, one must first understand the shape of the world when they were first laid down. We often imagine the map of the earth as a permanent fixture, a static arrangement of continents and islands that has remained unchanged since the dawn of memory. But the earth beneath our feet is a restless thing, and the coastlines we know today are merely the latest version of a story that has been rewritten many times over. Long before the first empires of the modern era, the Indonesian archipelago was not a collection of scattered islands, but a vast, continuous landmass known to geologists as Sundaland. It was a continent the size of modern Europe, a verdant expanse of tropical savannas, massive river systems, and dense rainforests that stretched from the tip of Southeast Asia all the way to the edges of the Australian shelf. In this forgotten world, the mountains of West Java were not coastal highlands, but the towering interior peaks of a sprawling interior, looking down upon a landscape that now lies hundreds of feet beneath the salt water of the Java Sea. As we look at the weathered columns of Gunung Padang today, we are looking at a mountain that was once a sanctuary in a world that was rapidly disappearing. Scientists tell us that at the end of the last ice age, roughly 14,000 years ago, the great glaciers began to melt, pouring unimaginable volumes of water back into the world's oceans. This period, often associated with the younger Dryas, a sudden and mysterious return to glacial conditions, followed by an even more abrupt warming, saw sea levels rise in catastrophic pulses. The vast plains of Sundaland, which had been home to flora, fauna, and perhaps a burgeoning human culture for millennia, were slowly but relentlessly swallowed by the tide. It is here, in this watery transition, that the mystery of Gunung Padang takes on a new and heavy significance. If a civilization had existed on those fertile plains, they would have watched their world shrink year by year, as the rivers backed up and the forests turned to marshes, and the marshes turned to sea. The survivors of such an inundation would have had nowhere to go but up. They would have retreated to the high ground, to the volcanic peaks that remained above the encroaching blue. In this light, Gunung Padang ceases to be a lonely temple on a hill, and instead becomes a high-ground refuge, a mountain citadel built by a people who had lost everything else to the waves. This theory of a lost maritime civilization suggests that the builders of the site were not primitive hunter-gatherers, but a sophisticated society that had mastered navigation and engineering long before the history books say they should have. They were a people of the water, forced by necessity to become a people of the stone. As the centuries passed and the climate stabilized into the world we recognize today, the lower sections of their great works would have been subjected to the relentless forces of the tropical environment. The heavy rains would have washed soil down the slopes, and the encroaching jungle would have tangled its roots into the masonry, burying the oldest and deepest layers of the structure in thick blankets of silt and vegetation. This natural burial creates a profound challenge for modern archaeology. When researchers dig into the earth at Gunung Padang, they find that the deeper they go, the more the evidence seems to slip through their fingers. The organic materials that might have provided a clear timeline, wood, bone, or fabric, have long since rotted away in the acidic, humid soil of the highlands. What remains is the stone itself, which does not easily give up its secrets to radiocarbon dating, a process that measures the decay of carbon in once living things. To date a stone, one must find organic matter trapped beneath it or within its mortar, and in the shifting, muddy layers of a mountain that has been reclaimed by the forest, such evidence is often contaminated or displaced. And so, we are left to wonder about the possibility of a lost world hidden beneath the Java Sea, a world that Gunung Padang was built to remember. If we could drain the waters of the Indonesian archipelago, we might find the ruins of vast cities, the foundations of ports that once traded across a continent that no longer exists. We might find that the strange, precise alignments of the stones at Gunung Padang were mirrored in structures that now rest in the dark, silent depths of the ocean floor. The geology of the region suggests that these drownings happened in stages, with sudden, violent episodes of flooding that would have felt like the end of the world to anyone living through them. It is a story that echoes through the mythologies of nearly every culture on Earth, the tale of a great flood that wiped the slate of history clean, leaving only a few survivors to carry the embers of their knowledge to the mountain peaks. As the narrator of this history, one cannot help but feel a sense of vertigo when standing on the upper terraces of the site. You are standing on what was once a majestic lookout over a continent. The air is cool here, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and distant rain, and if you close your eyes, you can almost feel the weight of those thousands of years pressing down upon the soil. The science of stratigraphy, the study of rock layers, and their formation over time, tells us that there are at least 4 distinct periods of construction at Gunung Padang, each one built directly on top of the ruins of the last. It is a vertical chronicle of human persistence. The lowest layer, buried deep within the heart of the hill, is the most enigmatic of all. Some geological surveys using ground-penetrating radar suggest that this foundation is not merely a pile of rocks, but a hollowed-out volcanic plug, modified by human hands to contain large rectangular chambers. If these chambers truly exist, they have been sealed away from the light of day for more than 10,000 years. They would have been carved or constructed at a time when the rest of the world was supposedly still in the Stone Age, wandering in small bands and living in caves. This is the point where mainstream science and the evidence of the site begin to diverge in a quiet, uneasy tension. The technical data suggests an antiquity that our current understanding of human progress cannot easily accommodate. It suggests that while the valleys were flooding and the world was changing, someone was here, on this mountain, working with stone on a scale that defies simple explanation. They were perhaps watching the stars, tracking the same celestial movements that we see today, and building a monument that would survive the rise of the oceans and the fall of their own civilization. The environmental changes that followed the end of the Ice Age would have been transformative. As the air grew warmer and the rains more frequent, the open savannas of Sundaland were replaced by the dense, impenetrable rainforests we see today. This shift in ecology would have isolated the communities living on the high ground, turning what was once a connected network of settlements into lonely outposts separated by miles of thick green canopy. The knowledge of how to build such massive structures, how to move stones weighing several tons up a steep mountainside, may have been lost as the struggle for daily survival in the jungle took precedence. Over the millennia, the great monument of Gunung Padang would have become a ghost, a half-remembered legend of a time before the water, slowly disappearing under a cloak of moss and fern. It is a humbling thought to consider how much of our history is written in water and shadow. We rely on the things that survive, the pottery shards, the stone tools, the durable monuments, to tell us who we are and where we came from. But what of the civilizations that built in wood, or those whose greatest achievements were claimed by the rising tides? The Java Sea may be a vast graveyard of human ambition, a silent archive of a maritime culture that flourished when the world was larger and the climate was different. Gunung Padang stands as the lone witness to that era, a stony finger pointing toward a past that we are only just beginning to perceive. As the mist rolls in across the valley, obscuring the modern villages and the distant roads, it is easy to imagine the world as it was then, a landscape of endless green stretching toward a horizon that has since been claimed by the sea. The possibility of this lost world is not just a romantic notion, it is a geological reality. The shelf is there, beneath the waves, mapped by sonar and explored by divers who find strange formations that look suspiciously like the work of hands, though the currents and the silt make certainty difficult. And so, the mountain remains a puzzle with half its pieces missing. We look at the top layers, the broken columns and the scattered terraces, and we try to infer the shape of the whole, but the foundation remains hidden, a secret kept by the earth itself, waiting for a time when we are ready to understand the true depth of our own antiquity. The stones are patient. They have survived the floods, the tremors of the earth, and the slow erosion of time. They will wait for as long as it takes for the story to be told in full, for the silt to be cleared and the lost world to finally come back into the light. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of a single drop of water falling into a deep, still pool, a sound that ripples through the silence of a mountain peak, carrying with it the weight of 10,000 years. As the morning mist clings to the jagged volcanic contours of Gunung Padang, a different kind of sound begins to emerge from the stillness. Not the rustle of the jungle canopy or the distant call of a bird, but a low, resonant hum that seems to vibrate from the very bones of the earth. When the first modern explorers climbed these terraces, they found more than just a graveyard of fallen columns and weathered andesite. They found a landscape that was designed to sing. Scattered across the 5 ascending levels of the megalithic complex are peculiar, elongated stones, pillars of volcanic rock that do not merely sit in the dirt, but wait for a touch to release a hidden voice. When struck gently with a smaller stone or a wooden mallet, these pillars do not produce the dull, heavy thud one would expect from solid rock. Instead, they ring out with a clear, metallic clarity, a pure musical note that hangs in the thin mountain air long after the strike has faded. These are the lithophones, the stones of sound, and they represent a mystery that modern acoustics and archaeology are only beginning to whisper about in the dark. In the language of the local Sundanese people, the name Gunung Padang is often translated as the Mountain of Light, but it also carries connotations of a place of learning or a place of manifestation. It is a site where the physical world was once intentionally tuned to a higher frequency. Scientists who have studied these sounding stones find themselves at a loss to explain the deliberate nature of their selection. These are not random rocks gathered from the surrounding hillsides. They are specific pillars of columnar basalt and andesite, chosen for their internal crystalline structure and their ability to resonate at specific pitches. It is as if the builders of this ancient pyramid were not just architects of stone, but masters of vibration. Individuals who understood that sound is not just something we hear, but a force that shapes the very fabric of our consciousness. As you walk through the terraces in your mind, you can almost feel the resonance beneath your feet, a subtle trembling in the ground that suggests the entire mountain was once a giant instrument, a massive acoustic machine designed to harmonize the human spirit with the rhythms of the cosmos. The arrangement of these musical stones is far from accidental. Throughout the 5 terraces, researchers have noted that certain lithophones are positioned in clusters almost like the keys of a piano or the bars of a xylophone. When struck in sequence, they produce a scale that feels hauntingly familiar yet ancient beyond reckoning. Geologists struggle to explain why these specific rocks were hauled up the steep slopes of the volcano, While the volcanic activity of the region naturally produces hexagonal columns, only a small fraction of these stones possess the tonal quality necessary to be a lithophone. To find them, the builders would have had to test thousands of stones, striking each one and listening for that elusive, ringing clarity. A process of selection that implies a sophisticated understanding of mineralogy and physics. And yet, the stratigraphy, the layers of soil and debris, tells us that some of these stones may have been positioned here during the Younger Dryas period, a time when mainstream history suggests humanity was comprised of simple hunter-gatherers, far too primitive to understand the complexities of acoustic resonance or the mathematics of musical intervals. There is a strange, quiet power in the idea that an entire mountain could be tuned. Scientists have begun to map the acoustic properties of the terraces, finding that the shape of the site itself acts as a natural amphitheatre. The way the stones are stacked, the angles of the retaining walls, and the orientation of the central spine of the hill all contribute to a phenomenon known as acoustic resonance. Sound waves produced on the lower levels are amplified as they travel upward, funneling toward the summit where the most sacred ceremonies likely took place. It is a design that suggests the builders were creating an immersive environment, a place where sound could be used to induce altered states of awareness, or to facilitate a communal connection to the divine. In many ancient spiritual practices, frequency was seen as the bridge between the seen and the unseen worlds. By striking these stones, the priests or shamans of Gunung Padang may have been attempting to tune the human body to the frequency of the earth itself, a practice that modern science is only now beginning to explore through the study of infrasound and its effects on the human brain. As the wind sighs through the gaps in the megaliths, one cannot help but wonder what these ancient melodies sounded like. Were they slow, rhythmic pulses that mirrored the beating of a heart, or complex, interlocking patterns that mimicked the cycles of the stars? The difficulty for modern science lies in the fact that sound leaves no trace in the archaeological record. We can find the stones, we can measure their vibrations, and we can calculate their decibels, but the music itself is a ghost, a phantom that vanished the moment the last player laid down their mallet. This absence of evidence creates a void that is often filled with skepticism. And yet, the physical reality of the lithophones remains. They are there, cold and heavy under the tropical sun, waiting for someone to rediscover the lost art of listening. The intentionality of their placement suggests a level of planning that defies the primitive label often bestowed upon our ancestors. It suggests a civilization that did not see itself as separate from nature, but as a participant in its grand unfolding symphony. We must ask ourselves why a culture would go to such immense lengths to create a musical mountain. In the deep time of our species, before the written word, and before the rise of the great Bronze Age empires, sound was the primary vessel for memory and meaning. A song could hold the history of a people, the map of a coastline, or the secrets of the seasons. Perhaps Gunung Padang was a library of sound, a place where the most important truths of a forgotten era were etched into the very vibrations of the rock. The stones do not decay like parchment, or rust like iron. They endure. They hold their notes for 10,000 years, waiting for a civilization that is quiet enough to hear them. As you drift deeper into the stillness of the night, consider the patience of these singing stones. They have watched the rise and fall of countless sun, the shifting of the constellations, and the slow, relentless march of the jungle. They are the silent witnesses to a chapter of our story that has been torn out of the history books, a chapter where humanity stood on the heights of a volcanic peak and played the earth like a drum. The mystery of the lithophones is a reminder that there are many ways of knowing the world, and that our modern obsession with the visual and the material may have blinded us to the subtle, invisible forces that govern the lives of those who came before. When we look at Gunung Padang, we see a pile of rocks, but when we listen to it, we perceive a masterpiece. The scientific difficulty in explaining these stones is not a failure of technology, but perhaps a failure of imagination. We struggle to reconcile the image of a Stone Age human with the reality of an acoustic engineer. But the evidence is carved in basalt. It is tuned to the key of the mountain, and as the shadows lengthen over the terraces, the stones remain, a testament to a time when we understood that the universe is not made of matter, but of music. The resonance of the past is still there, vibrating just beneath the surface of our awareness, waiting for the silence to become deep enough for the music to begin again. A single rusted iron gate stands at the base of the trail, a silent sentinel that marks more than just a physical boundary between the jungle and the terraces. It represents a threshold of understanding, a line drawn in the red earth where the cold data of the laboratory meets the burning heat of national pride. To walk this path is to step into a landscape where the soil is thick with more than just volcanic ash. It is saturated with the weight of human expectation. For decades, the air around Gunung Padang has been heavy with a specific kind of tension, a quiet, persistent friction between those who seek to rewrite the history of our species and those who believe the story has already been told. The conflict does not always play out in shouting matches or dramatic confrontations, but rather in the slow, methodical silence of a site that has been caught between two worlds. On one side, we find the independent researchers, those who look at the deep stratigraphy, the layers of earth and rock deposited over thousands of years, and see the fingerprints of a lost sophistication. They point to the radiocarbon dates, some reaching back 20,000 years or more, into the heart of the last ice age, and they ask how such a structure could exist in a time when we are told humanity consisted only of simple hunter-gatherers. On the other side stands the traditional archaeological establishment, the gatekeepers of the accepted timeline, who caution that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. They look at the same basalt columns and see the work of nature, perhaps subtly modified by much later hands, but certainly not the remnants of a global precursor civilization. And so, the mountain becomes a mirror, reflecting the biases and hopes of whoever gazes upon it. In the early 2010s, this tension reached a fever pitch when the Indonesian government took an unprecedented interest in the site. Under the administration of the time, the search for the truth of Gunung Padang was elevated from a local curiosity to a matter of national prestige. High-level task forces were formed, and the military was even brought in to assist with the logistics of the excavation. The message was clear. Indonesia was perhaps the cradle of human civilization, the home of the world's oldest pyramid, predating the wonders of Giza by tens of thousands of years. There is a seductive power in the idea of being first. When nationalism and science collide, the results are often as volatile as the volcanoes that ring the horizon. For a brief moment, the site was a hive of activity, with ground-penetrating radar scanning the deep voids and core samples being pulled from the dark belly of the hill. The air hummed with the possibility of a revelation that would shatter every textbook on the planet. But as the excavations pushed deeper, the pushback from the global academic community grew louder. Critics argued that the methods were rushed, that the interpretations were fueled by a desire for glory rather than a devotion to the slow, painstaking reality of the trowel and the brush. They worried that in the rush to find a pyramid, the actual, nuanced history of the Sundaland people was being trampled. Meanwhile, the mountain itself seemed to pull its secrets closer. Every time a new discovery was announced, a buried chamber, a strange metallic artifact, a layer of worked stone deep beneath the surface, it was met with a wave of skepticism that felt like a cold wind blowing through the palms. The debate became a battle for the narrative of the past. If Gunung Padang truly is a mountain-sized monument, built during the Younger Dryas, that mysterious, freezing interval nearly 13,000 years ago, when the world was plunged back into ice, then our entire understanding of human progress is a house of cards. It would mean that we did not slowly climb from the cave to the city, but rather that we have forgotten more than we currently know. It suggests a cycle of rise and fall, a rhythmic breathing of civilization that spans eons we can barely conceive of. As the years passed, the political winds shifted. New administrations brought new priorities, and the feverish pace of the government-backed excavations began to slow. The funding dried up, the heavy machinery was hauled away, and the grand proclamations of an ancient empire were replaced by a cautious, heavy silence. The site was effectively locked down, with further large-scale digging halted to preserve what remained. To some, this was a victory for scientific rigor, a necessary pause to prevent the destruction of a precious heritage site by over-eager enthusiasts. To others, it felt like a deliberate suppression, a closing of the book just as the most interesting chapter was being read. The halting of the excavations has left Gunung Padang in a state of perpetual limbo. It is a place of suspended animation, where the deep time secrets remain tantalizingly close, yet just out of reach. The voids detected by the radar, the large rectangular chambers that seem to sit hundreds of feet below the top terrace, remain unentered. They are dark, silent pockets of air and stone, holding whatever treasures or truths were placed there by hands that have been dust for 10,000 years. We are left to wonder, what lies in the dark? Is it merely the natural porousness of volcanic rock, or is it a library of stone, a vault of a forgotten age? This struggle for the story of the mountain reminds us that archaeology is never just about the past. It is about the present and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our place in the universe. When we dig into the earth, we are looking for our ancestors, but we are also looking for ourselves. We want to know that we come from something great, that the human spirit has always reached for the stars, even when the world was ending in ice and fire. The tension at Gunung Padang is the tension of the human condition, the desire to know the truth clashing with the fear of what that truth might demand of us. As the shadows of the giant frangipani trees stretch across the megaliths, the site feels less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. The basalt blocks do not care about the debates in the universities or the decrees from the capital. They have seen empires rise and fall. They have seen the sea levels rise and swallow the vast plains of Sundaland. They have watched the stars shift their positions in the heavens over 20,000 years of nights. They are patient. They can wait another century or another millennium for a generation that is ready to listen without the need to possess. The preservation of the site's secrets is, in a way, a gift. It allows the mystery to remain potent, a reminder that the world is still full of things we do not understand. In an age where every corner of the globe is mapped by satellites and every historical fact is indexed in a digital cloud, Gunung Padang remains a stubborn anomaly. It is a glitch in the matrix of our history, a jagged edge that refuses to be smoothed over by the consensus of the day. And so, the gate remains closed to the heavy drills and the intrusive probes, but the mountain remains open to the dreamer and the seeker. The secrets are still there, vibrating in the basalt, hidden in the layers of clay and ash, waiting for a time when the battle for the narrative has finally faded into the background. Perhaps the greatest lesson the mountain has to teach us is not about the date of its construction, but about the limits of our own certainty. As we stand on the upper terrace, looking out over the misty valleys of West Java, we are reminded that we are but a brief flicker in the long, deep memory of the earth. The stones were here before us, and they will be here long after our names are forgotten, guarding a truth that does not need our permission to exist. Beneath the soles of those who walk the grassy terraces of Gunung Padang, the earth holds its breath in a silence that has lasted for many thousands of years. We often think of history as something written on the surface, a series of footprints left in the dust or monuments reaching toward the clouds. But here, the true narrative seems to have retreated into the dark, cool depths of the volcanic rock. In the year 2014, as ground-penetrating radar and seismic tomography sent invisible pulses deep into the mountain's belly, the equipment returned a signal that felt less like geology and more like architecture. At a depth of roughly 15 meters, nearly 50 feet below the weathered andesite columns we see today, the sensors traced the outlines of a void. It is not the jagged, irregular shape of a natural lava tube or a collapsed pocket of earth. Instead, the data suggests a massive rectangular cavity, a space of deliberate geometry that the research team began to call Chamber 10. To imagine Chamber 10 is to confront a mystery that science, for all its modern precision, cannot yet touch. It sits in the heavy darkness, a room the size of a small house, encased in the very heart of the structure. The walls appear straight, the corners sharp, suggesting a level of engineering that defies the traditional timeline of human development in this region. If this chamber was constructed during the era suggested by the deepest carbon dating, some 20,000 years ago or more, then we are looking at a space carved or enclosed during the height of the last ice age. At a time when conventional history tells us humanity was comprised of simple hunter-gatherers, someone may have been hollow out the mountain to create a sanctuary of perfect right-angled stillness. What lies within that vacuum of time is a question that haunts the periphery of every archaeological discussion. In the absence of light and air, the imagination begins to populate the void with the remnants of a lost world. Perhaps it is a repository of records, a library of stone or metal that survived the cataclysms of the Younger Dryas, that period of abrupt cooling and subsequent flooding that reshaped the face of the planet. Or perhaps it is a royal sepulchre holding the remains of a lineage so ancient that their names have dissolved into the mist of Sunderland folklore. It could be a ritual space, a womb of the earth where initiates once sat in total sensory deprivation to commune with the spirits of the volcano. The possibilities are as vast as the silence itself, yet they remain just out of reach, protected by 15 meters of solid masonry and the fragile ethics of modern science. The dilemma facing the researchers at Gunung Padang is one of profound responsibility. To know for certain what is inside Chamber 10, one would have to drill. But the mountain is not merely a pile of rocks. It is a complex, layered organism of ancient basalt columns, many of which have been weakened by the slow creep of millennia and the shifting of the tectonic plates beneath Java. To pierce the heart of the structure is to risk its collapse. A single borehole, if placed incorrectly, could introduce oxygen, moisture, and microbes into a sealed environment that has been stable for 10,000 years, potentially destroying organic artifacts or delicate inscriptions before they can ever be recorded. Science, by its very nature, demands evidence, yet here, the pursuit of evidence threatens the very thing it seeks to understand. We find ourselves in a state of suspended animation, standing on the threshold of a door we are afraid to open. The sensors tell us the room is there. The mathematics of the radar waves confirm its hollow resonance. Yet, until a non-invasive way to peer through 15 meters of stone is perfected, Chamber 10 remains a ghost. It is a reminder that there are still places on this earth where our curiosity must be tempered by reverence. We are used to a world where every secret is eventually laid bare by a search engine or a satellite, but the mountain demands a different kind of patience. It asks us to sit with the unknown, to accept that some truths are guarded by the weight of the earth itself. As the clouds drift low over the site, tangling in the trees that cling to the slopes, one cannot help but feel that the mountain is intentionally keeping its secrets. The transition from the upper terraces to the hidden depths is not just a change in elevation, but a journey into a different kind of time, Up here the wind blows and the seasons change, but down in the void of Chamber 10, time has no meaning. There is no day or night, no rise and fall of civilizations, only the steady, rhythmic pulse of the planet. The stones were placed there with a purpose that we can only guess at, using techniques that seem to belong to a future we haven't reached or a past we have entirely forgotten. The skeptics argue that the void could be a natural anomaly, a fluke of the volcanic cooling process that happened to take on a geometric form. They suggest that the human mind, ever eager for patterns and stories, is simply projecting its own desires onto a blank canvas of rock. And yet, the sheer scale and placement of the cavity, aligned so precisely with the artificial terraces above, makes the natural explanation feel increasingly thin. If it were a natural cave, why does it sit exactly beneath the primary ceremonial axis of the site? Why does the surrounding material show signs of being worked and stacked? The mountain refuses to provide an easy answer, standing as a silent witness to the limits of our stratigraphy, the study of rock layers, and our radiocarbon dating. These tools are the best we have, but they are like candles held up against a vast, dark cavern. They illuminate a small circle of ground, but the shadows beyond remain impenetrable. And so, we wait. We wait for the technology to catch up with our questions, for a way to see through the stone without wounding it. Until then, Gunung Padang remains a masterpiece of the unexplained. It is a bridge between the world we think we know and a deep, ancestral memory that whispers of a much older story. The void within the mountain is not just a physical space. It is a symbol of everything that has been lost to the fog of time. It is a place where the records of the first architects might still rest, untouched by the sun, waiting for a generation that is ready to listen to what the silence has to say. As the light of the afternoon begins to soften, casting long purple shadows across the andesite blocks, the mystery of the chamber seems to grow heavier, more present. It is a weight that does not feel like a burden, but like a promise that the earth still holds wonders far greater than our current understanding, and that some stories are best told in the quiet, dark places where the world began. A single slender leaf falls from the canopy, spiraling through the humid air until it rests upon the edge of a hexagonal pillar, its delicate veins contrasting against the ancient, weathered stone. To the casual observer, these blocks are merely the debris of a collapsed mountain, a chaotic jumble of volcanic rock reclaimed by the jungle. But as the eye begins to trace the alignment of the terraces, a different story emerges, one told in the silent language of mathematics. There is a strange, quiet precision hidden within the layout of Gunung Padang that defies the primitive labels often assigned to the deep past. When researchers began to measure the distances between the megalithic enclosures and the specific proportions of the 5 rising terraces, they found themselves confronted by a recurring ghost, a mathematical constant that appears throughout the natural world. The ratios of the site's dimensions seem to whisper of the golden ratio, that divine proportion of 1.618, which governs the spiral of a galaxy, the unfurling of a fern, and the chambers of a nautilus shell. It is a ratio that suggests a profound understanding of harmony, a belief that a structure should not merely sit upon the earth, but should resonate with the fundamental frequency of the universe itself. If we accept the carbon dating that places the oldest layers of this site 20,000 years into our past, we are forced to reconcile this geometry with a time when humanity was supposedly composed only of simple hunter-gatherers. And yet, here is a blueprint that speaks of a sophisticated cognitive architecture, a mind capable of abstracting the laws of nature into a physical monument. The terraces do not climb the hill in random intervals. Instead, they follow a rhythmic progression, a series of mathematical steps that create a sense of balance and inevitability as one ascends toward the summit. This is not the work of people stumbling through the dark of prehistory. It is the work of architects who saw the world as a unified whole, where the placement of a stone was as much a spiritual act as it was a structural one. We often think of geometry as a modern invention, a tool of the Greeks or the Egyptians, but Gunung Padang suggests that these truths were known long before the first pharaoh ever looked upon the Nile. As we walk along the perimeter of the third terrace, the patterns become even more haunting. The use of sacred geometry, the application of specific shapes and ratios believed to hold metaphysical power, is a thread that connects the most disparate cultures of the ancient world. We see it in the sprawling complexes of Angkor Wat, in the alignment of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and in the intricate stone circles of Western Europe. But to find these same principles embedded in a structure that may predate the end of the last ice age is to suggest a common source of knowledge, a mother culture, or a shared human intuition that stretches back into the mists of the Younger Dryas, that turbulent period of ecological collapse and rising seas. How did a civilization living 20 millennia ago possess the foresight to align their sanctuary with the stars and the very proportions of life itself? Perhaps their understanding of the world was not built on the accumulation of data, as ours is, but on a deep, meditative observation of the patterns that repeat in every leaf, every shell, and every constellation. They may have viewed the earth not as a resource to be conquered, but as a living geometry to be mirrored. To them, the golden ratio was likely not a number on a page, but a sacred rhythm, a pulse they felt in their own blood and saw reflected in the heavens. The builders of Gunung Padang used these ratios to create a space that feels right to the human spirit, a place where the heavy andesite blocks seem to lose their weight through the sheer elegance of their arrangement. Even in its ruined state, the site exerts a calming influence, a structural harmony that bypasses the modern analytical mind and speaks directly to something older within us. It is a geometry of the soul, etched into the skin of the mountain. And so, we are left to wonder about the cognitive abilities of these ancient ancestors. Mainstream history often views human progress as a linear climb, a slow crawl from the cave to the computer. But the geometry of the sacred suggests a different narrative, one of peaks and valleys, where profound wisdom was attained, lost, and then painstakingly rediscovered. If the people of 20,000 years ago were capable of such sophisticated design, then our definition of primitive is not a reflection of their reality, but a limitation of our own imagination. The stones remain silent on the methods of their placement, but their positions speak volumes. They tell us that the builders understood the relationship between the part and the whole, between the mountain and the sky. They knew that by building in accordance with these natural constants, they were anchoring their monument to the eternal. As the shadows stretch across the terraces, the mathematical precision of the site seems to glow with a quiet, inner light. A reminder that the language of the universe is written in shapes and numbers, and that we are only just beginning to learn how to read the first few lines of a very old book. Meanwhile, the wind brushes through the tall grass that grows between the joints of the pillars, a soft whistling sound that seems to carry the echoes of those forgotten mathematicians. They did not leave behind written records or blueprints on parchment, but they left something more enduring. They left their thoughts in stone, shaped into the very proportions that define the beauty of the world. It is a legacy of symmetry and grace, waiting in the silence of the Indonesian highlands for us to recognize the reflection of our own potential. As we contemplate the staggering depth of time that separates us from those hands, the geometry of Gunung Padang becomes a bridge. It is a bridge that spans the abyss of the great cataclysm, connecting the modern seeker with a mind that lived in a world we can scarcely imagine. A world where the stars were closer, The forests were deeper, and the mountain was a temple built to the measure of the divine. The mystery of how they knew these things persists, drifting like the mist that clings to the valley floor. Was it a gift from an even older civilization, or is it simply that the human mind, when tuned to the frequency of nature, naturally arrives at the same mathematical truths? Perhaps the golden ratio is not something we discovered, but something we are built from, a blueprint that we instinctively recreate whenever we try to build something that will last forever. The sun has long since dipped below the horizon now, and the geometry of the sacred fades into the velvety blue of the tropical night. The shapes of the terraces are no longer distinct, but their presence is still felt, a heavy rhythmic heartbeat beneath the earth. In the darkness, the numbers and ratios fall away, leaving only the feeling of being in the presence of a great and ancient intelligence, a quiet power that has watched the world change for 20,000 years, waiting for the moment when we finally understand that the past is not behind us, but beneath our feet, carved into the very bones of the world. As the stars begin to emerge, one by one, aligning themselves with the invisible axes of the temple, the true scale of the mystery becomes clear. We are not just looking at a pile of rocks, but at a mirror that reflects a version of ourselves we have long forgotten, a version that knew how to speak to the mountain, how to measure the light, and how to build a home within the harmony of the cosmos. And as we drift closer to the edge of sleep, the patterns of Gunung Padang continue to swirl in the mind, a slow, beautiful dance of circles and squares, of ratios and constants, leading us deeper into the heart of the great, golden silence. The air at the summit of Gunung Padang does not merely sit still, it seems to vibrate with a frequency that the human ear cannot quite capture, but the body feels as a subtle, rhythmic pulse. Beneath the moss and the weathered andesite columns, something moves that defies the simple logic of stone and soil. It is a quiet, persistent hum that bypasses the senses and speaks directly to the nerves. For those who spend enough time among the 5 terraces, the mountain ceases to be a passive object of study and becomes something more akin to a living battery, a reservoir of ancient forces that have lingered here since the earth was young. Scientists and researchers, arriving with their magnetometers and sensitive electronic equipment, often find themselves baffled by the erratic behavior of their instruments. There are pockets of the summit where the needle of a compass will suddenly shiver and spin, losing its grip on the north as if caught in a localized whirlpool of magnetism. These electromagnetic anomalies are not easily dismissed as mere equipment failure, for they occur with a strange consistency, centered around specific clusters of the columnar basalt pillars. It is as if the mountain itself is distorting the invisible lines of the world, bending the very fabric of the Earth's magnetic field into a shape we do not yet understand. The geological composition of Gunung Padang provides a partial clue to this mystery, yet it only deepens the sense of wonder. The mountain is primarily composed of volcanic andesite, a dense, iron-rich rock that formed millions of years ago when the inner fires of the earth cooled into these long, hexagonal prisms. Because of its high mineral content, the mountain is naturally conductive, a massive upright spire of stone capable of channeling electrical currents from the atmosphere or the deep crust below. Some geologists suggest that the specific arrangement of these stones, stacked and layered by human hands over thousands of years, may have turned the entire hill into a giant capacitor, a structure designed to store and discharge energy. We must wonder if the architects of the Younger Dryas, that chilling period of global upheaval nearly 12,000 years ago, understood the piezoelectric properties of the rock they were moving. When pressure is applied to certain types of crystal-bearing stone, it generates a small electrical charge. Imagine the weight of millions of tons of structured terrace pressing down into the earth, creating a constant, silent flow of energy through the mountain's core. It is a bridge between the physical and the ethereal, a place where the weight of the world produces the spark of the divine. As the twilight deepens and the shadows of the pillars stretch long across the grass, the modern pilgrims begin to arrive. They do not come with shovels or carbon dating kits, nor do they seek the cold, hard facts of stratigraphy, the study of rock layers that tells us how much time has passed since a seed was buried or a wall was built. Instead, they come for the rasa, the feeling of the place. They are drawn by a deep-seated belief that Gunung Padang is a tempat suci, a sacred site where the veil between different states of being is thin. You might see them sitting in quiet meditation, their backs pressed against the cool, dark stone, seeking a form of healing that no modern medicine can provide. They speak of a recharging of the soul, a sensation of warmth that rises through the soles of the feet and settles in the chest. To them, the mountain is a physician of the spirit, an ancient battery that has been waiting for millennia to share its stored vitality with those who know how to listen. They are the latest link in a chain of human presence that stretches back through the Neolithic, past the dawn of agriculture and into a darkness where history and myth become one. The boundary where geology ends and the unexplained begins is not a sharp line, but a soft, blurred horizon, much like the one currently fading into the Indonesian night. While a skeptic might point to the natural iron content of the soil to explain the compass readings, they cannot so easily explain why the anomalies seem to concentrate around the man-made chambers buried deep within the hill. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed the existence of large hollow spaces, some as deep as 30 meters beneath the surface. These are not the jagged, irregular caves of nature, but symmetrical, rectangular voids. In the presence of these hidden rooms, the air feels different, heavy with the weight of uncounted centuries. One cannot help but feel that these chambers were designed to act as resonators, perhaps amplifying the natural vibrations of the earth to create a specific harmonic environment. If the mountain is a battery, perhaps these rooms were the terminals, the places where the energy was focused for purposes we can now only guess at. Was it for healing? Was it for a form of communication that required no words? Or was it to anchor the human spirit to the planet during times of celestial chaos? The silence of the mountain is not an empty silence. It is a crowded, heavy stillness, filled with the echoes of every footfall that has ever climbed these terraces. As we contemplate the possibility of a lost technology, not one of gears and wires, but of resonance and stone, the rigid structures of our modern understanding begin to soften. We are taught that the path of progress is a straight line, rising steadily from the primitive to the complex. But standing here, amidst the humming stones of Gunung Padang, that line begins to look more like a circle. We find ourselves looking back at a people who may have mastered a science of the earth that we have entirely forgotten. They did not seek to conquer nature, but to tune themselves to it, using the very bones of the world to build a sanctuary of light and power. The iron in the rock, the water in the soil, and the electricity in the air were their tools, and the mountain was their masterpiece. And so we drift in the space between what can be measured and what can only be felt. The magnetometers may twitch and the compasses may fail, but the true mystery lies in the way the mountain changes the person who stands upon it. It is a reminder that there are forces in this world that do not fit into a spreadsheet or a textbook, forces that are as real as the gravity holding us to the earth, yet as elusive as a dream. As the stars begin to peer through the canopy of the Javanese sky, the mountain seems to settle into the earth, its ancient pulse slowing to match the rhythm of our own breathing. We are guests in a house built by giants of the spirit, a place where the energy of the earth and the aspirations of humanity once met in a perfect, resonant chord. The stones remain silent, holding their charge, waiting for the day when we are finally quiet enough to hear what they are trying to say. In this deep, golden peace, the questions of how and when begin to fade, leaving only the profound, vibrating reality of the here and now, a world where the earth is alive and we are merely waking up to its song. The darkness is warm, the stone is steady, and the mountain continues its long, slow meditation beneath the turning wheel of the cosmos. Every atom of the andesite, every grain of the ancient soil is a testament to a time when we knew how to live in concert with the invisible, how to draw strength from the deep places, and how to build a legacy that even 10,000 years of rain could not wash away. We rest now in the shadow of that knowledge, letting the mystery carry us down into the soft, quiet depths of sleep. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a place when the questions outnumber the answers, a silence that feels less like an absence of sound and more like a heavy velvet curtain drawn across the face of the past. We often move through the world with the quiet confidence of the modern age, believing that with enough light, enough sensors, and enough data points, every shadow can be chased away. We call it the arrogance of the present, the subtle unspoken assumption that because we possess the tools to measure the world, we possess the wisdom to understand it. But Gunung Padang stands as a gentle rebuke to that certainty. It is a monument not just to ancient stonecutters, but to the vast, insurmountable limits of human knowing. Even if we were to peel back every layer of earth, even if we were to date every fragment of charcoal and map every subterranean chamber with perfect precision, there are echoes here that will never reach us. The intent of a mind that lived 20,000 years ago is a country we have no map for. We can measure the alignment of the pillars, but we cannot feel the weight of the devotion that placed them there. We can find the charcoal of a fire, but we cannot hear the songs that were sung as the smoke drifted into a Pleistocene night. As the years pass and the moss grows thicker over the andesite columns, we begin to realize that some aspects of this mountain are simply lost to the currents of time. There is a beauty in this realization, a strange, quiet comfort in knowing that the world still holds secrets that refuse to be decoded. If we could explain everything, the world would feel much smaller, much more fragile. Instead, Gunung Padang remains a symbol of human potential that stretches back into a darkness we can barely imagine. It suggests that our ancestors were not merely survivors of a harsh and frozen world, but dreamers who looked at the stars and felt the need to anchor their spirits in the earth. They worked with a scale of time that dwarfs our own, building structures meant to outlast civilizations, outlast languages, and perhaps even outlast memory itself. They were successful. They have left us with a puzzle so profound that it forces us to reconsider the very definition of progress. We look at the stratigraphy, the way the layers of soil and stone are stacked like the pages of a dusty book, and we see that the most sophisticated work often lies at the very bottom, buried deepest in the dark. It is a reversal of the story we usually tell ourselves about the steady climb of humanity, and so we are left to wander the terraces in our minds, sifting through the most persistent questions that remain unanswered. Why did they choose this specific volcanic neck, this isolated spine of rock, to wrap in a skin of stone? Was it the magnetic pull of the earth beneath? Or perhaps the way the morning mist clings to the valley below, making the mountain feel like an island in a sea of clouds? We may never know if the chambers, hidden deep within the belly of the hill, were tombs for kings whose names have vanished, or if they were resonance chambers designed to amplify the low, humming vibration of the earth itself. We may never know if the people who built the earliest layers were the same people who watched the stars shift during the Younger Dryas, that strange, cold snap in the Earth's history when the world seemed to hold its breath for 1,000 years. Was Gunung Padang a response to a changing climate, a fortress of spirit built against the encroaching ice and rising seas? Or was it a library of stone, a way of passing down a message that they knew would be forgotten if it were written on anything less permanent than the mountain itself? The mystery persists because the evidence is both overwhelming and elusive. We see the radiocarbon dates, those scientific measurements of decaying carbon atoms that tell us these stones were handled by human hands 10, 15, even 20,000 years ago. And the mind recoils. It is too much time to bridge. We try to imagine a society capable of such a feat, yet leaving behind no pottery, no metal, no written word. Perhaps they lived in a way that left no scar upon the earth except for the beauty of their architecture. Perhaps their greatness was not measured in what they owned, but in what they understood about the relationship between the heavens and the soil. As we drift further into the quiet of the night, we can let go of the need for a final answer. We can allow Gunung Padang to exist as it is, a magnificent, silent sentinel standing at the edge of our understanding. It is a reminder that we are part of a very old, very long story, a story with chapters that were written long before the first city was ever imagined. The value of the unknown is that it invites us to wonder. It keeps our spirits humble and our imaginations vast. When we look at the weathered faces of the andesite blocks, we aren't just looking at rocks, we are looking at a mirror. We see our own desire to be remembered, our own need to create something that lasts, and our own search for meaning in a universe that often feels cold and indifferent. Gunung Padang is a testament to the fact that we have always been more than we seem. Even in the depths of the Ice Age, we were architects, we were astronomers, we were seekers. The mountain does not need to yield its secrets to be sacred. Its power lies in its persistence, in the way it continues to hold its ground while the centuries wash over it like waves against a cliff. As the air grows still and the world around us fades into the soft shadows of sleep, we carry the image of the mountain with us. We see the 5 terraces rising like a stairway toward the stars, each level a step further back into the misty reaches of deep time. We feel the weight of the earth and the lightness of the clouds. We realize that while science may one day tell us how the stones were moved or exactly when the fires were lit, it may never be able to tell us why. And in that why lies the heart of the mystery. It is a secret kept by the ancestors, whispered into the stone and buried under the roots of the trees. It is a secret that doesn't need to be solved to be felt. It is enough to know that they were here, that they worked and prayed and looked at the same moon that shines outside your window tonight. They built a legacy that even 10,000 years of rain could not wash away, and now they invite us to rest in the shadow of that endurance. The mountain is at peace, and for now, that is all we need to know. The questions remain, but they are no longer heavy. They are like the stars, distant, glowing, and beautiful in their unreachable heights. We let them drift away, one by one, as we sink deeper into the quiet, leaving the mountain to its long, slow meditation beneath the turning wheel of the cosmos. The air at the summit of Gunung Padang carries a specific ancient coolness, a scent of damp earth and crushed fern that feels as though it has been trapped in the stone for 20,000 years. As the moon rises over the West Java highlands, its light spills across the 5 terraces like milk, softening the hard edges of the volcanic columns. These hexagonal pillars, hewn from the very bones of the earth, seem to glow with a faint, borrowed silver, their geometric precision standing in silent defiance of the chaotic jungle that presses in from all sides. We move slowly now, our footsteps muffled by the grass, passing through the first terrace where the stones lie in jumbled heaps, like the scattered alphabet of a language we can no longer read. The wind begins to pick up, a low rhythmic sigh that travels from the valley floor and filters through the gaps between the megaliths. It produces a sound unlike any other, a hollow, resonant hum that vibrates deep in the chest, as if the mountain itself is breathing through a flute of stone. We ascend the narrow stairs, feeling the texture of the andesite beneath our palms. It is rough, weathered by 10,000 monsoons, yet there is a deliberate shape to it that no natural erosion could ever replicate. On the second terrace, the shadows stretch long and thin, reaching out toward the third and fourth levels, where the mystery only deepens. Here, the ground beneath us is not merely soil, but a complex tapestry of human effort, layers of sand, clay, and carefully placed rocks that extend down into the darkness, far deeper than the eye can see. We do not need to visualize the seismic scans or the carbon dating results tonight. We only need to feel the weight of the time they represent. We are standing atop a chronicle of survival, a testament to a people who saw this peak not as a wild place, but as a canvas for the infinite. The hexagonal pillars stand upright in the moonlight, some leaning together like weary travelers, others lying flat, forming a floor that has supported the weight of countless generations. As we reach the fifth and highest terrace, the world below seems to fall away into a sea of mist. The surrounding volcanoes are merely dark silhouettes against a canopy of stars, and for a moment the distinction between the earth and the heavens feels fragile, almost non-existent. It is here, in the stillness of the summit, that the need for definitive answers begins to dissolve. We have spent so long demanding that the mountain reveal its secrets, asking who carved these stones, how they were moved, and what gods they were meant to appease. But the mountain offers no voice, only the steady, unchanging presence of its own existence. There is a profound peace in accepting the unknown, in allowing the gaps in our history to remain as they are, dark, quiet, and sacred. The why of Gunung Padang is perhaps less important than the is. It exists as a bridge between our modern world and a time so remote it feels like a dream, reminding us that our ancestors were not primitive shadows, but architects of the impossible, driven by a vision that surpassed the limits of their tools. The wind shifts, carrying the faint sound of a distant stream, and the hexagonal pillars seem to settle further into their earthen beds. We can almost see them, the people of the younger Dryas moving through this same moonlight, their hands calloused by the same stones we touch today. They lived through a world in transition, a world of rising seas and shifting climates, and yet they chose to build something that would endure long after their names were forgotten. Their legacy is not found in written records or iron crowns, but in the very geometry of the hill, in the way they shaped the mountain to mirror the order they found in the stars. To be here is to participate in their meditation, to share in a silence that has been cultivated for 200 centuries. We let go of the charts, the graphs, and the debates over stratigraphy, that study of the Earth's layers that tells us so much about the when, but so little about the soul. Instead, we embrace the stillness. We listen to the mountain sleep. The pillars do not move. The stars do not falter in their slow circular dance. Everything is exactly as it should be. The mystery of Gunung Padang is not a puzzle to be solved, but a landscape to be inhabited. It is a reminder that we are part of a very long, very old story, one that began in the dark of a cave and reached for the light of the sun on a lonely Indonesian hilltop. As we prepare to leave the summit, we take one last look at the terraces, now almost blurred by the thickening mist. The grey stones are retreating back into the shadow of the mountain, hiding their faces from the coming dawn. They have seen empires rise and fall. They have watched the forests grow and the rivers change their course. They are patient. They can wait another 10,000 years for us to truly understand. Our journey through the deep time of the mountain concludes not with a final discovery, but with a quiet reverence for the endurance of the human spirit. We descend the slopes, the air growing warmer as we move toward the valley, but a part of us remains up there, among the leaning pillars and the ancient dust. The mountain continues its long, slow meditation, cradling the secrets of the first civilizations in its stony heart. We leave it to its rest, comforted by the knowledge that even in our modern, frantic world, there are still places where time stands still, where the past is not a memory, but a physical presence waiting in the moonlight. The mountain is at peace, and as we drift into our own reflections, we carry that peace with us. The mystery remains as vast and beautiful as the night sky, and for now that is more than enough. The mountain sleeps, and so shall we, so shall